Welcome everyone to Your Budget, Use It or Lose It. This will be first topic in a series of topics over the next couple of quarters that my esteemed colleagues and I will be opining on and sharing our knowledge. Today's topic really is about that leftover budget money. And people are saying, what? You have leftover budget? Yeah, there are organizations that have leftover budget, depending on the budget cycle of the year. And they may scramble a little bit to figure out what it is they can do to use up that budget. Because a lot of folks, if you don't use it within a given year, management says, hey, you didn't use it, now you get to lose it. So today we will talk about that very topic. I will let my colleagues do intros and then I will introduce myself. So Steve.
Oh boy, I get to go first. Hi, everybody. And those of you who have been around a long time and remember the introductory videos I did for AIM CAP will recognize the phrase, Hi, I'm Steve Weissman. And I said that particularly for Jesse, with whom I worked closely on that project, those many years ago. I am Steve Weissman. I am the InfoGov guy, principal consultant at Holly Group. And it's all about helping you, our clients, to do information right. And that covers information very broadly, records and beyond, all the way through to actual structured data, because there is information in there that probably we should treat as records as well, subject to retention and compliance and privacy and all those good things. A big part of that, of course, is trying to field initiatives with a capital I or not to address all those issues. And just to tack on to what Donda has already said, it's the end of the year. So budget issues are top of mind. Many are already set for the next year, but there is still a time to use up what's left over. Plus, as Jesse once pointed out to us, there are budget cycles that are not calendar end. So this is an issue that may well come up for you at the close of subsequent quarters, depending on what your annual calendar is. So today, hopefully, we'll tell a few stories about, well, how do you use that up? What can you do quickly without breaking a bank so that you can retain that budget for next year, but not do it in a ticky-tack kind of way? The only reason I did it is because, no, you can actually make some progress. And I think that's what I'm hoping to get out of today. Over to
Jesse.
you, Jesse.
Yeah, Jesse Wilkins, president and principal with Athro Consulting. Like Steve and like Donda, I'm a solo consultant focused on different aspects of information management. And probably my key to fame these days is training and certification as much as anything else. Um, as Steve mentioned, I did bring up the idea of these different budget cycles because depending on what type of organization you have, maybe your budget cycle is July through June. We know in the federal government, it's October 1st through September 30th. Uh, and while the budgeting process, as Steve said, is probably done for the next year, we still want to leverage that last little bit of money, whether that's a couple of $1,000s, whether it's maybe a little more than a couple of $1,000s, but to do something that's meaningful and not, as Steve said, ticky-tacky. So looking forward to talking about that some more today.
That's the official phrase for it, by the way.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. So I'm Donda Young. I am president and principal consultant for Helios Consulting. I in the space with these two gents, and when we talked about doing this particular event and future ones, this one was an interesting topic for me personally because I was working at the time with a client that had some potential budget. Wasn't sure what it was going to be, but theirs was going to start at the beginning of next year. And whether those budgets are small or maybe they could still have significant dollars, six figures or more, um, there are things you can do in short periods of time to move your program needle forward. And when we talked about setting up this event, as you guys can probably imagine, we kind of geek out about this topic and many others, and we just get on a roll. So I'm excited about sharing the stories that we have from our past clients, what we've learned from our colleagues in the industry on what they've done, what they've seen to help support those of you that are on our call today and those of you that will see it later on during the recording.
Can I start with a story?
Yes, you may,
I
Steve.
have a story.
Please.
It has
Sorry.
how much time do we have?
We are limited, so keep it short.
I have a story that has the additional value of being true. And it's a great story about how not to use up your budget.
Mm.
It goes back a couple of years, but I got a call. I think it was probably late October as opposed to here. I'm looking at the calendar, mid-November, but the point is the same. The call ran as follows. Hi, my boss says I have a month to use up my budget. Um, I've been chartered to do basically a scanning project for trying to get rid of paper. So I bought a system. Can you help me?
Mm.
And I tried to suppress groans and sighs and a little bit of eye rolling and laughter because it was too late. The poor guy, I get where he was coming from. I understand the need, but he did a really good job of putting the horse and the cart in the wrong order. So we talked, and effectively I said, "How did you know what to buy? Did you think through? I mean, you all, I'm sure, know this well, but how did you know what to buy? What, even just in terms of the scanners and the prep, did you think about, does the paper have staples? Is it in color, the paper? Do you need color if it's a color document? Different sizes, front, two-sided,
The
very
checklist.
fundamental. But it started with, I need to use up my budget.
Mm.
So I've carried that lesson with me since. And one of my motivations for wanting to do this today, this session in particular, is because that fellow, and we never did end up working together, by the way. I think I scared him because he realized he hadn't thought about it. And I don't want people and organizations to go through that because now they kind of had to retrofit
Mm.
what they bought in a way that might address at least some of their needs. So there's my story. I hope it wasn't too terribly long, but it's
No, I
maybe
think
you
I think
guys
that's
resonate to this sort of thing. Maybe your management has this. Just do something. It's like,
yeah.
okay, so what can you do to
But be
satisfy or
smart and
scratch that itch?
strategic. Yeah, so be smart and strategic about what it is you're going to do. And I'm sure that individual did some due diligence and had a checklist of things to look through, but maybe not all the things. And that's something that I think this conversation can lead to. Um, Maybe you need to bring in folks maybe like us to help you figure out what it is that you really want to accomplish. What's your goal? What's your business problem you're trying to solve?
Oh, I've heard that before. Let's
Oh,
see.
I know. Um, and be able to support you in making the decisions and justifying, I think is a better word, justifying the decision to get to the end result that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I've had as we all have, I think, I've had all kinds of conversations over the years where it starts something like, presumably there's a management mandate to do something, as you said, Steve. And then we get to this point where I'm trying to think of the right word here because the word I'm thinking of may be perceived as hurtful, and I don't mean it to be at all. Um, but I'm going to use it anyway. So the word is ignorant. And what I mean by that is that we know this stuff because we've been doing this for a day or two, right? And we've had these conversations with lots and lots of people, lots of times. And I think a lot of times people don't know what they don't know, and so they don't
Mhm.
know what to ask for. If you say you've got $10,000 worth of budget left, I can tell you 10, 20 different ways to spend it, but you may not have the frame of reference to understand that you actually can do something with 10 grand and that 10 grand can be enough to significantly move the needle, even if it's just in terms of planning and setting priorities to talk about in more depth next year, right? It gets to this weird place where because all of us have our own blinders on and we're doing our own work and we're heads down focused on what's right in front of us, that sometimes you just don't have the frame of reference to think, okay, I have this money left. What what are my options? What could I do with it? What is the realm of possibilities? And I think that's where conversations like this and chapter meetings and just meeting up for Thirsty Thursdays or whatever can be places where you can surface and have some of those discussions.
Yeah, I agree, Jesse. And I would say, and this kind of goes to what Ruth put in the chat, in what ways can one advocate for needs using remaining budget? Well, one of those is building a business case of what you're trying to accomplish. You always want to align um, your business case with the mission and the objectives of your organization. And as my motto goes, start small, grow big. Um, you can start small. And one way of using up maybe some of that budget could be in getting someone in to help you build that business case. If that's not something you've done in the past, and you know that you need maybe a sounding board to support you through that process, that's one way that you could use up some of that budget to help you plan going forward in the future for the next year or the next budget cycle. Um, and that too, as Steve said earlier, it's about telling a story. It's not about, well, I want to do this and this is what it's going to cost. Yes, those things are included, but you need to sell the why and the value that it's going to bring the organization. You can't just bring it from, well, I'm in a compliance role and this is what is best practice and we need to do it. Great. How does that tie back to your organization? How is that going to improve other people's lives and the almighty dollar for your organization? And so those are the stories you would need to include in a business case to move forward. But if you've not done that before, maybe it's time to have that conversation with management to say, hey, I want to do this. I really want to do it right. Can I spend some of this leftover or still on the books budget dollars to support us making that business case and bringing someone in to help us do that?
The do it right thing, of course, resonates with me.
Yep.
I let me let me take see, I was going to ask. I'm just going to do it. How's that? Let me take a slightly different approach, only in that the conversations that I have had, that one I relayed being probably the most notable for the wrong reasons, often come with something of a time pressure
Mm,
that I'm going to run out of my budget year and I need to do something more quickly. Because Donna, what you said, absolutely. If 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 you can't make the case, you're never going to get budget, and making the case itself can be a project of some duration and detail, and must be done at some point or another, even if it's a whole series of smaller ones to build the big one. Okay. Um, my perpendicular response is some of sorry, let me find the beginning of this thought. Those of you who know me, Jesse's grinning, Donda's grinning. I always do that. Let me like as not, you have a pretty good idea of the things that you want to accomplish. And you may just need additional resource to get them done. You may need a sounding board. I mean, there are a number of different roles that can be played to move your project forward so that if you are looking for consulting help as opposed to, technology vendor help, maybe, because I'm not sure what I'm about to say is applicable to them. There is an argument to be made, and one that I make all the time, that says there's a level of detail variable here. So speaking certainly for me, but I think philosophically, Donda and Jesse, you guys are aligned with this thinking. Um, and I think that because I know we've talked about it. If you have lesser rather than greater amounts of budget that you want to spend rather than risk losing, we can, and people like us can often answer those questions or address those needs in a scalable way that scales to fit whatever the budget is that you have to spend on it. So, very large projects, I go places and I interview people in person to understand their pain points and understand the processes of, the flow of information and all the good things. I go to the warehouses and look in the boxes of records to see what's there. That takes longer, that costs more money. There are things that can be done that doesn't require that level of lifting. Phone calls instead of in-person interviews, 10 of them instead of 210 of them. And I think that presupposes an understanding that you already have about some of the things that you want to do, but it does move the needle and it does set the foundation for what may come next. And it's a great way even to test certain things. Are these the right groups that we want to start with in order to help those groups do information right? We think they're ripe for it, either because they've asked for this kind of help or because by their charter, we know they need this kind of help. So, like an HR function, we know that there are privacy concerns that are particularly endemic to HR. And they should care, but we don't really know for certainty or to what degree they're doing things. You want to start small, grow big. Thank you, Donda. See, I listen. Maybe we can jump in and take the temperature a bit. Quick, I don't want to quite say quick and dirty, but certainly quick and at a higher level of detail that will feed directly into the thing you want to do. Safeguards the budget from disappearing next year, moves that forward, probably unearths other lines of inquiry, maybe other groups because they interact with other places, and there may be insights into that. Done and done. So the level of detail thing, a maturity assessment, it's sort of the same thing, but maybe we take the temperature across multiple groups. So I know that many of the people I talk to, and honestly, it's a bit self-serving, but I try to look at, well, what's the big picture project here? But as I told somebody recently, it's like, look, if I can help you with 10K projects and we can bang them out, I'm just as happy than one 100K project.
Yeah, I agree, Steve. I think it is about moving the needle, and it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be a big budget dollar. It can be those little mini assessments, or in some realms and spaces, it's a proof of concept. Or it could be a proof of value, which I've done before. Show me what this is going to do for me, and let's have that conversation. And those are the small, quick wins. I think an organization can put into play to help them grow bigger and develop their program um, to where it wants to go. And it's a great way to fetter out the gaps, and it's also a great way to determine what went well, what didn't, and learn from those opportunities. Jesse?
Yeah. First of all, it's my time for a story, and then
Okay.
I'm going to take a sort of a different angle on how we bound and scope these types of things. So my story is that I was approached last year in August by somebody who wanted to do, as it turns out, a playbook, a RIM playbook. I love doing RIM playbooks. It's kind of my thing. And we had an introductory discussion, and then nothing else happened with it. I figured they must have moved on. They're very busy. It is what it is. Mid-October, the person came back to me and said, I really want to do a playbook, but I've only got this fixed amount of money left to do it. What can you do for me? So
Yeah.
the client knew what they wanted. The client knew that what they wanted was more than the money they had, but was there something I could do that would let them move that needle forward, start small, grow big, and position themselves for better success in 2024? And so what we built was the playbook outline and the playbook structure. And then we built, I want to say it ended up being about 15 to 18 plays. Now, this is a highly regulated entity, multinational entity. And so you can only imagine that their playbook just for RIM is probably 3 or 4 times that big. But we were able to scope it down and say, well, let's focus on the things that are most important, that are the highest visibility, that you already have documentation for, so we're not reinventing the wheel, and then the scaffolding to hang all of that off of. And then if you want me to do more work on it in 2024, I'm happy to. If you want to do the work in 2024 yourself, happy to support you if and how you need that. But it gave them a starting point that then they could build on for this year. And so I tell that story not only because I like that story, but also because it leads to another way that you can move the needle forward by limiting the scope. The detail thing is a big one, right? I can give you an hour phone call and provide value, or we can do $100,000+ project. But another way of looking at it is by constraining it across certain organizational lines, right? And Steve, I think you alluded to this a little bit. If you have a multinational company, maybe you don't deal with, you know, Ireland and Singapore and Canada and every place outside the US. You only deal with the US or only deal with Colorado. If it's a organization that's got diverse lines of business, maybe only focus on one line of business. And even within that, as Steve said, maybe it's not a full blown elbows deep analysis. Maybe it's just a high level, let's have a couple of phone conversations and interviews. Show me your retention schedule, and I'm not going to completely update it for you in the course of 2 weeks, but I can at least make some recommendations for improvement that then we could work on in 2025. You could work on, you could hire somebody else to do, but you've at least moved the thing forward by not trying to boil the elephant one bite at a time, if I can horribly mangle those two things.
Shove the whole donut in your face at once?
That I can do.
Yeah.
All right, I have another story. Can I tell another story?
Sure.
It actually relates to what Jesse just said in terms of picking where you start. Okay, this turned into quite an interesting longer term engagement. Didn't really start that way. It's what ended up with two phases, much in the way Jesse described. In terms of starting other places, they got approached by a company, a national company, and they into um, construction things. Also, they got regulation, um, the usual things to contend with. Not huge by like big financial company standards, but large contractor. And they came to me and said, we need a new ERP system. And it occurred to us, her, the individual, I think, in fact, was the source, but was too modest to say so, that we have a lot of other information systems that touch the ERP system, that feed into it or draw information out of it. So before we just rip and replace ERP, we should really look into what else is touching it and what the ripple effects are going to be. It was a very old ERP system. It definitely needed to be updated. It was a very closed system. And the other ones surrounding, I mean, I wish I was making this up, but one of the other systems that they had turned out to be an amazing, complicated, extensive series of Microsoft Access databases that they had managed to link up somehow. So if somebody over at the end of the chain made a change, it eventually rippled its way through. And the stuff that rippled its way through then somehow had to be entered into the old ERP system for billing or what have you.
Woof.
So I've carried that lesson along with me also, because in terms of starting other places, as opposed to different departments or geographies, this was an entirely different technology stack that we don't typically think of as being part of the information governance scope. That's changing, and I'm pushing my clients and anybody I can buttonhole on the subway to start thinking about this more holistically. But they were really smart. And so it ended up with some shorter term, lighter budgeted, I don't know, think tanks, I guess I'd call it almost. Because they had done the thinking to come up with, yeah, that's really important. And then I went away for a little while they did homework. And they had some business school interns who actually did a lot of process mapping. And then called me up and said, all right, we're ready for you to come back. And got into a bigger thing where I worked with them with those process maps and some interviewing and the usual things that we do that ended up right on into vendor selection and RFP writing, all as an entire single initiative that began with, we really need a new ERP. And I just thought that brilliantly illustrated how more holistic thinking can really pay value. And because we had scoped it so carefully, it didn't end up breaking their bank because we knew precisely what it is they needed my help with versus what they could do on their own with in-house resources and this bank of interns. It was brilliant. It worked out so very well. I heartily recommend it.
Well, it's interesting, Steve. There's a similarity in that story with a project that I'm going to tell my story, that I've recently worked on. And the business problem was our box environment is a mess. We need help. And we want to start with this particular group because, frankly, they're a mess. Like they can't find stuff. And that ask ended up really unsurfacing a lot of other things. Not only was it, can you just assess and evaluate and provide us some recommendations on this? But in that evaluation, I was able to determine that, hey, you've got probably 4 or 5 other areas of opportunity to better your compliance and risk management space. And here they are. Do you need to do all of these all at once? No. Absolutely not. Let's chunk it out. Let's phase this in and allow you the time to contemplate what resources you need on the project, what you're going to do internally yourselves, and what you need me to do. And I think it was an eye opener, certainly with the CIO that I was that I was working with. He got it. Like, I just need someone else to come in and say the thing and also validate that we have to do these data quality things up front before we can move to AI.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And it really is becoming um its own little story in and of itself of how to start the small and get to the bigger. Um Likelihood of starting more work with them next year is going to happen based off of that. I think it was just 2 months of evaluation, and it only took that long because of the engagement time from the client. That's one thing that is part of this story and our stories is to emphasize that you may want to do things and you may want to use your budget, but you also need to make sure that you have the resources to support even small engagements to move your needle forward. Because if you don't have those resources and you haven't determined what your roles and responsibilities are between you, folks like us, three consultants here today, but also with your IT folks, are they going to need to be involved in a little bit or a lot of this particular initiative? So it's important to really ground yourself, at least from my perspective. What's your culture? What's that look like? And what's the appetite for change? Because if you don't have the appetite for change internally, things are going to be a little more rocky than what you probably expected.
Oh gosh.
I, I want to tie
Go
into
ahead,
that
Jesse. Yeah.
in a couple of different ways. One of the things that I think can be a really small mini project that can really be helpful and that folks like us are not only qualified to do, but enjoy doing is helping you kind of think through and understand where you're actually at, right? Again, this doesn't have to be a 6-month assessment. Sometimes it can just be a couple of phone calls to say, okay, what are you trying to do? Where are you trying to get at? What's stopping you from getting there? And how can we both identify what you need to do and prioritize it, right? At a very, very high level. That's not something that takes a lot of time, but it can be immensely valuable going into the next year. Um, I think it's also interesting to kind of think through, and Ruth had put a couple of things in here that caused me to go down this path. One is budget and scope creep, and one is planning can assist with budgets. Well, yes, of course, but again, I think there's that to some extent that layer of ignorance that sometimes happens where people don't know what they don't know.
Hmm.
And so again, I think that's something that can be very helpful in terms of guiding people and saying, hey, AI is cool. All your stuff's in paper. There's step A, step B, step C before you get down to step ZZZ, right? And and making the case for that in a way that senior management understands. There is no magic potion to get your paper digitized. Somebody's going to have to do the work. The other thing I wanted to note is that today is November 20th. Even discounting holiday parties and time off and long weekends and whatnot, there's only about 22 business days left in the year. And most organizations are, let us say, not as productive as they might otherwise be between, say, December 15th and January 5th for lots of reasons that you can probably surmise. And so I think part of the challenge here becomes, okay, you want to get stuff done, but most of your IT team is out. Senior management is out. There's nobody here. You're the only one in the building some days, or at least it feels like that. So what can you realistically get done? Well, obviously we can't interview all the department heads if they're on vacation, but we can talk to you and we can do some planning and some strategizing and some thinking through things. Steve, I think you called it a bit of a think tank before.
Yeah.
And I think Donna, you had that same experience with the client you talked about. Again, it's stuff that I think can help position you to do the heavy lift in 2025 because you've had the opportunity to think through what are the priorities? What is the culture into which I'm trying to do this? And what's the change culture that I'm facing? Am I going to be, as one of my favorite movie scenes put it, are you going to be ice skating uphill? Um, and knowing that and taking the time to kind of think through and plan that is something that could pay huge dividends when you actually get to the face of the rock and start doing the work.
That's a great point. In
Thank you.
fact, wear a hat, no one will notice, as people have said to me. I'm talking with happens to be a excuse me, a local government, because I'm trying to also think of stories from different walks of life.
Fair.
I talked about a contractor. The first story I told was an insurance company. So here's a local government example where I'm pretty much doing with them already what you've described, working with them to answer the initial question as it came to me. I got to do a lot of stuff, and I'm not really sure how to think about how to get started. It's a very common
Right.
question.
Mhm.
You know, the client is very well aware of how many moving parts there are. I mean, you guys, I'm looking at who's on the video, but also anyone watching this, you know, even after the fact, you all know this. It's the whole information governance slash records management slash data side cleanup, whatever you want to call it, data cleansing. The work isn't easy. It's not straightforward, but the template can be. Maybe want to, I don't know if we want to, somebody I know calls them playbooks sometimes about how to do these things. Um, but staging it properly is really important. So this group, actually, there are two now that I think about it. One is a bank where I'm spending some time to chart through, have a couple conversations, and basically build an outline how this might go for lots of reasons, including budget. Here's the first phase, here's the second phase, and then depending on what we find out, the third phase could be any number of different things.
Right.
It involves some of the people I need to have involved. To your point, Jesse, I want to catch them before they break for the holidays. So I just did this the other day. Can you join one of our meetings and present some of what we've been talking about? Um, just to bring it home, one of the key questions there had to do with AI. And I did look at the clock, Donda, when you mentioned it. I can't believe we got 35 minutes into this thing before AI showed up in the conversation.
Couldn't resist,
No, I'm
man.
glad you
I was
did.
holding off.
I'm glad you did. But, you know, for me, the exciting part was that they're thinking about it. And I've said for years, based on another story that I won't tell at this juncture, but maybe later or a different session, where I came away with the mantra that the thinking is the work. All right, I'll tell it very quickly. I was actually teaching, it's a long time ago, but it was an AIM class. And we got through a lot of the setup and all this stuff. And somebody came to me at the initial break and said, this is all really great and interesting, but when do we start doing the work? And I ended up replying by saying, this is the work. And I've carried that forward as well, because I've noticed in all the years intervening, and it's in the chat here too, I'm looking at, you know, pre-plan before something happens. Questions are good. The answers will come, but you got to ask the questions, and to know what to ask and of whom, you've got to think about it ahead of time, that the thinking really is the work. So as a consultant, I can tell you that for very large projects, a good portion of the budgets are the interviewing, the time-consuming stuff. Because as a consultant, basically my commodity to sell is my time. But in terms of value, I am of the belief that it's all the thinking stuff and the coaching and working with clients to understand what the answers they're getting back mean and where did they come from and why are they asking this? It seems so obvious. That's where the value lies. And a lot of that can be done fairly quickly and fairly with a fairly light touch on budget. So it's always that push-pull too about do you want the most value versus the most work? And that depends on the client and how much they've already done the thinking. And like the story I told a few minutes ago, they already had resources to use to do the lifting, so they didn't have to pay me to do that. I'd have been happy to do it. Plus, I'd learn a lot. I'm about the learning as much as anybody.
Right.
But there are all these factors. Even when it comes to, I need to use up my budget. I don't want to get lost for myself. Why we're all here today. But I've got budget I want to use and put it to the most use possible. So if there's something you need done and don't have the hands, that's one way. Very tightly defined, very contained. But the other side is I need the value of the experience that we have to help guide me through how to set up that work to happen later.
Yeah, it's building that framework for them. So as you know, in the consultant space, if you're a long-term staff augment, then maybe that's not the best business model. Although for us, that probably works really well.
Well, like everything in consulting, it depends.
Exactly, exactly. But if you're, at least from my perspective, if you're helping them build a framework and then they're able to leverage that framework, rinse and repeat, modify, rinse and repeat, then I feel as though I've done my
Yes.
due diligence and I've done the quality job that I was set out for myself, for my client, because they are now sustainable.
Teach
They
them how
need
to
to come back to me on something else. Awesome. I'm there. I will support that and I will jump in. But I think a lot of organizations, they get a little intimidated maybe. Oh, I have to bring in a consultant. This is going to cost me a lot of money. Actually, depending on what it is and what we're able to, just do a couple of pre-conversations to get you to really what it is that you want to do, not really. It can be a small amount. It could be a grand. It could be 5K. It could be 10K. It could be somewhere in between. Who knows? But know that there are opportunities for you to build upon, whether it's to build that framework or it's you already have a framework and you need support in one particular area. Let's tackle that area because that's where you need the support. And I think it's through those conversations that folks like us would have with potential clients. As Jesse keeps saying, they don't know what they don't know. And part of what our value to them is, we can help them think through the process and get to a result that's going to satisfy justifying the budget dollars, but then more importantly, in my mind, is satisfying moving the needle forward for your program.
Right. And just to jump in really quick, some of this, you can kick me remotely. Some of these ideas, again, depending on where you are in your thinking and the support you have within your organization and all that, you might not need a consultant for, because a lot of it is just focus. And if these reminders are helpful on that score, certainly I feel like this session did its job.
Mhm.
Right.
But also tacking on another brief story, I was committed to myself that I was going to tell stories about things that actually have happened instead of just lecture from the mountaintop here, which I know I probably have done. Um, have a large project right now that's actually coming to a close that began with something much more tightly focused. I don't even want to say small because there were ways, maybe you have a lot of budget left over to use up that, typically there's it's the crumbs at this stage of the year, but not always.
Right.
I just want to put that out there too. But this began with, you know, it's an international organization and they're not really sure how to scope the actual work. There's pretty good understanding of what the work has to be, but they don't know how to scope it. They don't know how where to start, which office or which department or which series of questions, because there was just so much. And I'm a big proponent of, doing phases, and I've been advised as a consultant that's no good because they can cancel at any time or blah blah blah. It's like, well, this is what works for a lot of companies, so I'm doing that because it's about what the client needs, Sure. Um, but it began really with a lot of tire kicking, not even with the whole organization, but a select few to get some different perspectives before we could even write the statement of work. Because nobody was sure how to tackle it, which part of the elephant to boil, to go back to Jesse's. And that's a really good use of time and budget. It all is part of the thinking is the work. Because if you get that wrong, everything else that follows is going to, well, I don't even want to say wrong. If you're too diffuse, or you find out, oh, we really should have started with a different department from everything we're hearing, the further along in a project you are, the harder and more expensive and time consuming that is to correct.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would also take the opposite tack, which is there's also a certain amount of paralysis by analysis,
Oh,
right?
God. Yeah.
Where we know what we need to do. We literally don't know where to start. There's value in having the conversations you just said and in determining the right place to start. But by the same token, I think there's also value in starting.
Yep.
It's better to start with maybe the less than ideal department or project if you can drive it to completion and then move on to the what was perceived to be the right one, rather than, oh God, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know. And now it's 6 months later, and not only has the needle not moved, the needle is rusted in place. Um, Before we run out of time, because Tempus Fugit here, um, I want to note another opportunity, which I don't think organizations take advantage of enough. And selfishly, I always encourage people to do this, and that's training.
I was going to get there. Just like,
Training can be formal training, it can be instructor-led training, it can be the subscription services that people like AIM offer, but I don't know that there's ever a bad time to sharpen the axe, as it were. There's a famous quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln that says, if I should be asked to chop down a tree and given 6 hours to do it, I would spend the first 4 hours sharpening my axe." And I think in a time when training budgets are often the first thing to get cut, if you have that money, those crumbs, as Steve mentioned, left over, there are far worse ways to spend them than by finding a training or a local chapter meeting or seminar or something that will help you sharpen your own axe in support of the work that you're doing for the organization. There's an awful lot of it out there. Some of it is very, very good. Some of it is very, very inexpensive or even free, or just the cost of your local chapter meeting. But I think that's just something that often gets overlooked because we have our consulting budget and our training budget, and never the twain shall meet.
I think I'd add a little bit to that, Jesse, just from a perspective of the training doesn't necessarily have to be your RIM team or your IG team. It could be your employees. You need training for them. As you guys know, something near and dear to my heart is a records or information coordinator network. You could have someone build some of that training to help train what you're the folks that you already have established. Because they need a little bit of that added elevation in knowledge from an IG perspective. I know from firsthand experience being longtime insurance practitioner in IG that training definitely was a budget that got cut. And it got cut early. If there's a way for you to leverage that training budget early, get it in, even if, like Jesse mentioned, going to whether it's a in-person chapter meeting or some online training that you have to purchase, do it early in your budget cycle, even if it's months or quarters down the road, so that you don't lose that opportunity.
I'll go you one further because I had this happen more than a couple of times. Don't call it training. And I know that sounds like a cheat code, and maybe it is, but I've had clients tell me I got to put this under something else. Help me make the case. Sometimes there's budget sharing. It pays to have lunch with, to bring RIM people and IG people and IT people. And I got, it was just that kind of an opportunity where the records person and the IT person happened to be work buddies and they would have lunch together. And it just unfolded that neither of them had enough budget individually to do a thing that they both knew they wanted to do, but together they did.
Yeah.
And it did include a training component, but that's one of the first times that cheat actually manifested. It's a while ago because they realized we could call it something else. And I don't remember exactly what they called it, but it wasn't training. It was, they might have put it under consultant. They might have put it under the technology. I forget what, I wish, sorry, I just drew a blank on the word they used. It was basically how to use the system, and it came out the IT side.
Familiarization.
Yeah, that might have been it. Because there wasn't a budget certainly wasn't a budget for RIM training.
Right.
So call it something else. That, whatever works.
No, and I think that point about budget sharing is a really important one if that's politically allowed at your organization,
Yeah, right.
and even more importantly, if you have those relationships, right? Because the IT team needs to get stuff done, the RIM team needs to get stuff, the privacy team needs to get stuff done, and if you can get them all singing from the same hymnal, that's just an added bonus. So, you craft the training or you bring somebody in and they do their thing, and cross-functional team hears the same message from the same trusted third party delivery. I mean, that's another reason to bring somebody in, right? Is because we don't have the political baggage. But that idea of budget sharing, I think too many organizations just don't think through, either because of silos or, again, they just don't even think to do it.
And I have another story, but I just looked at the clock. We have a minute left, so you'll have to tune in next time.
That's right.
But it is about butting up with other departments, particularly bridging IG/RM/IT for somebody who changed role from one side to the other and realized now what the heck everybody'd been talking about, now that they have to go clean up the things that happened. So anyway,
I love it.
It's a cliffhanger, Steve.
It is.
It's a cliffhanger.
Real cliff
It is a cliffhanger. Well, guys, we probably have about 30 seconds left. I have found just having conversations with the two of you and sharing our experiences together offline and here. They're just valuable knowledge nuggets, as I like to call them. And they may be made of donut at some point, but it's 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 spaces like this that I think are hugely valuable for those that are on our call today, but then also for those that are going to see this later on, and they'll be able to take those nuggets back and use that think time that Steve has made mention of to be able to figure out what it is they can do with what's left over in their budget. And I just want to thank the both of you for your knowledge, for sharing, and for including me in the mix.
Could have
So
done it
thank you
without
both.
you. Wouldn't have done it without you. We are open to comments, constructive criticisms of all sorts. Not the word constructive, but I'm not terribly worried. Community that we are. It's one of the things I like about it. Constructive is a given. Topics to cover. We will be doing this regularly, hopefully quarterly, working towards more frequent than that. And it is all about the stories, and the more you have to share with us, your stories, the more we want to do it, because it's really about getting stuff done, and we don't pretend to have a monopoly on experiences. So thank you from my perspective. We couldn't and wouldn't have done it without you guys either. So thanks for tuning in.
I put my email address in the chat, Steve.
Oh,
You guys may want to do the same in case people do have questions or comments.
we're always on LinkedIn. We are probably the most reachable people in the world.
Probably,
Yeah,
yes.
but definitely thanks for coming, and hopefully we'll see you guys again at another one of these in the months to come.
Stay tuned. Thank you, everybody.